What would you do if you stumbled upon evidence that the government had been conducting illegal experiments on innocent people for over 6 decades? For civilian contractor Ericka Davis, that question became terrifyingly real when she found one. Unlocked file cabinet in the basement of a military research facility. What she discovered inside would shake her to her core and launch a 5-year battle against one of the most powerful cover-ups in American military history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Ericka Davis had always been the type of person who noticed things others missed. Growing up in small-town Indiana as the daughter of a high school librarian and a mechanic, she developed an eye for detail and an almost compulsive need to organize information. At 28, with her shoulder-length auburn hair usually tied back in a practical ponytail and her ever-present reading glasses, she looked exactly like what she was, a meticulous data analyst who preferred the company of spreadsheets to people. The job offer from Blackwater Ridge Research Facility had come at the perfect time. After 3 years working for a struggling consulting firm in Indianapolis, Ericka was ready for something bigger, something that mattered. The facility, located 40 miles outside Denver, Colorado, was a joint military-civilian research installation focused on advanced medical technologies for warfighter enhancement. The salary was excellent, the benefits comprehensive, and most importantly for Ericka, they needed someone to digitize and organize 60 years' worth of research archives. It's a massive undertaking, Dr. William Harrison, the facility director, had explained during her interview. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of authoritative presence that commanded immediate respect. We're talking about thousands of files, research reports, and experimental data dating back to the 1960s. The Department of Defense wants everything digitized and properly cataloged for historical preservation. Ericka's eyes had lit up at the challenge. This was exactly the kind of comprehensive organizational project she lived for. How much material are we talking about, Dr. Harrison? Approximately 40,000 documents across multiple research programs, he'd replied. Everything from early psychological studies to advanced pharmaceutical research. You'd be working largely independently, with access to restricted archives that most of our staff has never seen. The security clearance process takes about 6 weeks, but once that's complete, you'd essentially have free rein to organize everything as you see fit. The facility itself was impressive in an austere, government sort of way. Built into the side of a mountain, most of the complex was underground, connected by a maze of sterile corridors lined with offices, laboratories, and storage areas. The main archive was located on sub-level 3, a vast space filled with rows upon rows of file cabinets, boxes, and environmental storage units containing decades of military research. On her first day, Ericka met her supervisor, Colonel Janet Morrison, a stern woman with short gray hair and piercing blue eyes who had overseen archive security for 15 years. "Ms. Davis," the colonel said crisply, "you'll be working with highly classified material. Everything you see, read, or organize is subject to the strictest confidentiality agreements. You've signed your non-disclosure agreements, but I want to be absolutely clear. Any unauthorized disclosure of classified information is a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison." "I understand completely, Colonel Morrison," Ericka replied. "I take confidentiality very seriously." "Good. Your workstation is in Archive Bay 7. You'll have access to research files from 1963 to 2019, organized by program designation. Start with the earliest materials and work chronologically. Dr. Harrison wants a comprehensive digital catalog completed within 18 months. The work began routinely enough. Ericka spent her first weeks familiarizing herself with the filing system, which was a mixture of military designation codes and research program names that often seemed deliberately obscure. Project names like Cognitive Enhancement Initiative, Stress Resistance Protocol, and Physiological Optimization Studies filled folder after folder of typed reports, handwritten notes, and experimental data. Most of the early files dealt with legitimate military research, studies on soldier nutrition, equipment effectiveness, and training methodologies. The work was meticulous but straightforward, exactly the kind of detailed organizational challenge Ericka enjoyed. She developed a systematic approach, photographing each document with a high-resolution scanner, then entering detailed metadata into a comprehensive database that would make the archive searchable for the first time in decades. It was during her third week that Ericka first noticed the inconsistencies. Certain files referenced experimental subjects using only numbers rather than names, which seemed odd for what were supposed to be volunteer studies involving military personnel. Other documents contained medical terminology that seemed unusually technical for routine research, discussing procedures like involuntary subject acquisition and non-consensual physiological monitoring. "Colonel Morrison," Ericka said during one of their weekly check-ins, "I'm finding some terminology in the older files that seems unusual. Some of these studies reference procedures that don't sound like they involved willing participants." The colonel's expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Davis, your job is to catalog and digitize, not to interpret or analyze the content. Many of these historical research programs use terminology that might seem unusual by today's standards, but all research conducted at this facility has always been fully authorized and compliant with applicable regulations." "Of course," Ericka replied quickly. "I was just wondering if there might be additional context documents that would help me understand the proper classification categories." "Stick to the filing system as it exists," Colonel Morrison said firmly. "Don't look for context that isn't there." But Ericka couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more files she processed, the more disturbing details emerged. References to acquired subjects who were processed through various experimental protocols. Medical reports describing severe adverse reactions to experimental drugs, with clinical notes that showed no concern for the subject's well-being. Financial records indicating payments to third parties for subject procurement services. Most troubling were the geographical references. Many of the experimental subjects seemed to come from specific locations: VA hospitals, homeless shelters, psychiatric facilities, and even state prisons. The documentation suggested these weren't volunteer military personnel at all, but civilians who had somehow become research subjects without any clear indication of informed consent. Ericka began keeping her own notes, carefully documenting the patterns she was discovering. She told herself she was just being thorough, creating additional context for the digital archive. But deep down, she knew she was documenting something much more serious. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Ericka was working in a section of the archive she'd never accessed before, processing files from something called Program Mindbridge that dated back to 1967. As she worked her way through a row of cabinets, she discovered that one of the older file units wasn't properly locked. The security mechanism had apparently failed, leaving the cabinet accessible without the special keycard required for the most sensitive materials. Inside were files that made her blood run cold. Detailed medical reports describing experimental procedures performed on subjects who were clearly identified as psychiatric patients, homeless individuals, and prisoners. Photographs of experimental facilities that looked more like torture chambers than research laboratories. Financial records showing payments to corrupt officials at hospitals and prisons for providing unwilling research subjects. But the most damning evidence was a series of memoranda between facility leadership and Pentagon officials, dating from 1965 to 1989, explicitly discussing the need to maintain plausible deniability regarding non-consensual research protocols. The documents made it clear that senior officials knew they were conducting illegal experiments on innocent civilians and had developed elaborate cover stories to hide their activities. One memo, dated March 15, 1972, was particularly chilling. Written by someone identified only as Deputy Director, Special Projects. It read, "Subject acquisition continues to meet research requirements. Recent procurement from Denver Municipal Hospital yielded 12 viable candidates for Protocol 7 testing. Recommend expanding relationships with additional psychiatric facilities to ensure adequate subject pipeline. All disposal protocols have been followed per standard procedures." Disposal protocols. They were talking about human beings like laboratory equipment. Ericka's hands shook as she photographed document after document. This wasn't just unethical research. This was systematic abuse of the most vulnerable members of society, conducted over decades with full knowledge and approval from the highest levels of military leadership, and it was still happening. Some of the files were dated as recently as 2018, suggesting that whatever this program had become, it had never truly ended. As she worked through the unlocked cabinet, Ericka realized she was documenting evidence of crimes that had been covered up for over 60 years. War crimes, human rights violations, systematic torture disguised as medical research. And she was the first person outside the conspiracy who had ever seen the complete picture. The question that terrified her most wasn't what she had found, it was what she was going to do about it. Because one thing was absolutely certain: the people responsible for this had spent decades ensuring that anyone who threatened to expose them would be silenced permanently. As the afternoon wore on, and Ericka continued photographing the evidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every footstep in the corridor outside made her jump. Every time the building's ventilation system cycled on, she froze, listening for sounds that might indicate someone was coming. By the time she finished documenting the contents of the unlocked cabinet, Ericka had photographed over 300 pages of evidence proving systematic human experimentation, cover-ups involving senior Pentagon officials, and ongoing illegal research programs. She had enough evidence to bring down careers, trigger congressional investigations, and potentially send dozens of people to prison. She also knew that having this evidence made her one of the most dangerous people in America to a very powerful group of individuals who had already proven they would do anything to protect their secrets. As she carefully returned the files to their original positions and secured the cabinet, Ericka made a decision that would change her life forever. She wasn't going to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. She wasn't going to file her reports and hope someone else would take action. She was going to expose them all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, Ericka arrived at work with a plan. She would continue her regular archival duties while secretly copying the most damning evidence from the unlocked cabinet. But as she badged into Sub-Level 3, she immediately sensed that something had changed. Dr. William Harrison was waiting for her in Archive Bay 7, along with Colonel Morrison and two men in dark suits she'd never seen before. The atmosphere was tense, electric with unspoken menace. "Miss Davis," Dr. Harrison said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I'd like you to meet some colleagues from our oversight department. This is Director Marcus Webb and Assistant Director Paul Kruger from the Defense Intelligence Agency." Webb was a lean man in his 50s with cold gray eyes and the kind of stillness that suggested he was always calculating. Kruger was younger, broader, with the build of someone who had spent time in military special operations. Both men studied Ericka with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Miss Davis," Webb said in a voice devoid of warmth, "we understand you've been making excellent progress with the archive digitization project. Dr. Harrison speaks very highly of your attention to detail." "Thank you," Ericka managed, her mouth suddenly dry. "I'm enjoying the work, I'm sure you are, Webb continued. Such comprehensive access to historical materials must be fascinating for someone with your background. Tell me, have you encountered any irregularities in the filing systems? Documents that seem out of place or unusually classified? Ericka's heart hammered against her ribs. They knew. Somehow they already knew she'd accessed the restricted files. I've noticed some inconsistencies in the organization system, she sighed carefully. Some files seem to be miscategorized, but I've been following Colonel Morrison's guidance to maintain the existing structure. Webb exchanged a glance with Kruger that lasted a fraction of a second, but felt loaded with meaning. Of course. Maintaining existing protocols is essential for security purposes. I'm sure you understand that some of these historical documents contain sensitive information that could be easily misinterpreted without proper context. Absolutely, Ericka replied. I signed comprehensive NDAs. I understand my responsibilities. Doctor. Harrison stepped forward, his demeanor shifting to what Ericka now recognized as carefully calculated friendliness. Ms. Davis, we've decided to expand your access to some additional archive sections. There are materials in Sub-Level 4 that need immediate attention. Colonel Morrison will provide you with the new security protocols. Sub-Level 4. Ericka had never heard of a Sub-Level 4, and the facility blueprints she'd seen during orientation only showed 3 underground levels. But she nodded as if this was perfectly normal. One more thing, Webb said, his voice carrying a subtle edge. We've implemented enhanced security monitoring in all archive areas. Every document access, every digital scan, every file movement is now tracked in real time for audit purposes. We want to ensure complete accountability for all materials. The message was clear. They would be watching her every move. After the men left, Colonel Morrison escorted Ericka to a service elevator she'd never used before. As they descended past Sub-Level 3, Ericka realized they were going deeper into the pivot mountain than she'd thought possible. Colonel, she said as casually as possible, I wasn't aware there were additional levels to the facility. The facility has evolved over the decades, Morrison replied curtly. Sub-Level 4 houses our most sensitive historical archives. Materials that require special handling and absolute discretion. The elevator opened onto a corridor that looked older than the upper levels, with concrete walls painted institutional. Green and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows. The air smelled of chemicals and disinfectant, with an underlying metallic odor that made Ericka's stomach turn. Archive Section 4 Alpha was smaller than the spaces upstairs, containing only a dozen file cabinets and several climate-controlled storage units. But what immediately caught Ericka's attention were the photographs mounted on the walls, images of the facility from different decades, showing its evolution from a small research station to the massive underground complex it had become. In the oldest photographs dating back to the 1960s, she could see construction workers building what appeared to be medical facilities underground. Later images showed the installation of sophisticated laboratory equipment, isolation chambers, and what looked disturbingly like holding cells. Your assignment here is straightforward, Colonel Morrison explained, handing Ericka a tablet loaded with scanning software. These files contain research summaries from our earliest programs. They need to be digitized for historical preservation, but they're too sensitive for the standard archival process. You'll work down here 2 days per week with all materials remaining in this section. As Morrison left, Ericka began examining the files in Section 4 Alpha. What she found was worse than anything she discovered the previous day. These weren't just documents about illegal experiments, they were operational manuals, detailed protocols for subject acquisition from vulnerable populations, training materials for personnel conducting enhanced interrogation research, financial procedures for maintaining shell companies that funneled money to corrupt officials at hospitals, prisons, and psychiatric facilities across the country. One file, labeled Operation Blackwater Historical Overview, contained a comprehensive timeline of the facility's true purpose. What Ericka read made her realize that Blackwater Ridge wasn't just a research facility that had conducted some illegal experiments. It was the headquarters of a massive, decades-long operation to develop psychological and pharmaceutical weapons through systematic torture of innocent civilians. The operation had begun in 1963 as a joint CIA-Pentagon project focused on enhanced interrogation techniques and psychological warfare applications. Under the cover of legitimate medical research, they had established relationships with dozens of institutions across the country: veterans hospitals, state psychiatric facilities, homeless shelters, and prisons that provided a steady stream of vulnerable subjects for experimentation. The early programs had tested everything from hallucinogenic drugs to sensory deprivation to surgical procedures designed to alter personality and memory. As the years progressed, the research had expanded into genetic manipulation, behavioral conditioning, and what the documents euphemistically called involuntary psychological reconstruction. But the most chilling discovery was that the program had never ended. It had simply evolved, becoming more sophisticated and more carefully hidden. The documents showed that as of 2019, Blackwater Ridge was still conducting experimental procedures on unwilling subjects, now sourced primarily through a network of private psychiatric hospitals and addiction treatment centers that were secretly owned by Defense Department shell companies. Director Marcus Webb wasn't just an oversight official from the DIA. According to the files, he was the operational commander of the entire program, responsible for coordinating subject acquisition, research protocols, and the elimination of security threats. The documents made it clear that anyone who had ever threatened to expose the operation had been neutralized through a variety of methods, ranging from discrediting and career destruction to more permanent solutions. As Ericka photographed page after page of evidence, she began to understand the full scope of what she was up against. This wasn't just a cover-up involving a few corrupt officials. This was a massive, well-funded operation with connections throughout the military, intelligence community, and private sector. An operation that had successfully hidden its activities for 60 years by systematically eliminating anyone who posed a threat. The personnel files in Section 4 Alpha included detailed backgrounds on everyone who had ever worked on the programs. Scientists, doctors, military officers, and civilian contractors who had participated in the research over the decades. Many of the files were marked with codes that took Ericka several hours to decipher. When she finally understood the classification system, her blood turned to ice. Active meant the person was still involved in current operations. Retired indicated they had left the program, but remained under strict surveillance to ensure their continued silence. Neutralized meant exactly what it sounded like. There were over 200 files marked neutralized, spanning 6 decades. Scientists who had suffered mysterious accidents. Whistleblowers who had committed suicide under suspicious circumstances. Journalists who had died in car crashes just before publishing investigative stories. Family members who had been killed to send messages to potential defectors. And then Ericka found her own file. It was thin, containing only basic background information from her security clearance investigation and employment records. But it was there, with a notation that made her hands shake. Subject shows exceptional analytical capabilities and attention to detail. Potential security risk if exposed to sensitive materials. Recommend enhanced monitoring and containment. Protocols if evidence of unauthorized access detected. They had been planning for this possibility from the moment they hired her. Her entire employment at Blackwater Ridge had been carefully orchestrated to give her access to sensitive materials while keeping her under constant surveillance. She wasn't just a data analyst hired to organize archives. She was a test subject herself, part of an ongoing experiment to determine how civilian contractors with high-level clearances responded to exposure to classified information. But as Ericka continued reading her file, she discovered something that Webb and his associates didn't know she had found. A handwritten note from Dr. Harrison, dated just 2 weeks earlier. Subject demonstrates ideal psychological profile for conversion to operational asset. Recommend gradual exposure to sensitive materials followed by recruitment offer. If recruitment fails, implement standard neutralization protocols. They weren't just monitoring her to prevent leaks. They were planning to either recruit her into their conspiracy or kill her to protect their secrets. As the full weight of her situation settled over her, Ericka realized that she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a historical cover-up. She had discovered an active, ongoing criminal enterprise that had spent 60 years perfecting the art of eliminating threats to its existence. Webb, Harrison, Morrison, and Kruger weren't just hiding evidence of past crimes. They were actively planning her murder. The question was no longer whether she should expose what she'd found. The question was whether she could stay alive long enough to do it. As Ericka carefully returned the files to their original positions, she began planning her survival. She had maybe days, possibly only hours, before they decided she had seen too much. Her only chance was to get the evidence out of the facility and into the hands of people who could act on it before Webb's team made their move. But first, she had to figure out how to escape a mountain bunker staffed by professional killers who were already watching her every move. Ericka's hands trembled as she sat in her Honda Civic in the facility parking lot, engine running, trying to process what she'd just discovered. The evening mountain air was crisp, but she was sweating despite the cold. Every instinct screamed at her to drive away and never look back, but she knew it was too late for that. They were already watching her, already planning her fate. She needed help, but who could she trust? The facility was crawling with people who either worked directly for Webb or were too scared to act against him. The local police would be useless against a Defense Intelligence Agency operation. Even the FBI might be compromised. The documents had referenced cooperation from federal law enforcement assets in previous cover-up operations. That night, Ericka barely slept. Every sound outside her apartment made her jump. Every car that drove past seemed to slow down just a little too much. She kept the lights off and peered through the blinds, looking for surveillance teams that might be watching her building. By 3 a.m., she was certain she'd spotted at least 2 vehicles that had been parked in different locations, but always with a clear view of her windows. The next morning brought her first direct confrontation with the conspiracy she'd uncovered. As Ericka badged into the facility, her access card was rejected. She tried again, same result. A red light blinked on the security scanner, and within seconds, a guard approached. "Ms. Davis? I need you to come with me, please." She was escorted, not to her usual work area, but to Dr. Harrison's office on the main level. The room was elegant in a sterile, corporate way, with mahogany furniture and walls lined with medical diplomas and military commendations. Harrison sat behind his desk, reviewing a file that Ericka realized with a chill contained her employment. "Records. Please sit down," Harrison said without looking up. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your work performance." "Concerns?" Ericka kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I wasn't aware of any performance issues." Harrison finally looked at her, his expression carefully neutral. "According to Colonel Morrison's reports, you've been asking questions about material classification, requesting context for historical documents, and spending time reviewing files outside your assigned digitization parameters. This suggests a level of curiosity that exceeds your job requirements." "I was trying to be thorough," Ericka replied. "I thought understanding the context would help me create better catalog categories." "Ms. Davis," Harrison leaned forward, his voice taking on a paternal tone that somehow made him seem more threatening. "I hired you because of your reputation for discretion and focus. Data analysts who succeed in sensitive environments are those who complete their assigned tasks without unnecessary speculation about broader contexts. The message was clear. Stop asking questions, stop thinking about what you're seeing. Just do your job and keep quiet. I understand, Dr. Harrison. I'll focus more narrowly on the digitization tasks. I'm sure you will. Harrison opened her file and made a note. However, given these early concerns, we're implementing some additional oversight measures. You'll be working exclusively with pre-selected document sets that have been reviewed for content appropriateness. No more independent access to archive sections. Ericka felt her heart sink. They were cutting off her access to evidence before she could document everything she'd found. Of course. Whatever you think is best. Excellent. Harrison stood, indicating. The meeting was over. Oh, and Ms. Davis? We've also decided to pair you with a senior researcher for training purposes. Dr. Sarah Chun will be working with you directly to ensure you understand proper protocols for handling sensitive materials. As Ericka left Harrison's office, she realized this was the beginning of her isolation. Dr. Chun wasn't a mentor, she was a handler, assigned to monitor every document Ericka accessed and every question she asked. The walls were closing in. Dr. Sarah Chun turned out to be exactly what Ericka had feared, a competent, professional scientist who was completely complicit in the facility's true purpose. In her early 40s with short black hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Chun had the kind of clinical detachment that allowed her to discuss horrific human experiments as if they were routine laboratory procedures. The key to working effectively. Here, Chun explained as they walked through Sublevel 3, is understanding that everything we do serves a larger purpose. National security sometimes requires difficult decisions and unconventional research methods. Unconventional? Ericka probed carefully. Historical context is important, Chun continued, stopping beside a locked cabinet that Ericka recognized from her previous exploration. During the Cold War, our adversaries were developing sophisticated psychological warfare techniques. Our researchers had to match and exceed those capabilities to protect American interests. Some of the early methodologies might seem harsh by contemporary standards, but they were necessary for national defense. It was a carefully crafted rationalization that managed to acknowledge the existence of unethical research while framing it as justified and historical. Chun was testing Ericka's reaction, trying to determine whether she could be brought into the conspiracy or needed to be eliminated as a threat. I see, Ericka said neutrally. I suppose wartime research operates under different ethical frameworks. Exactly. I'm glad you understand. Chun smiled with what seemed like genuine relief. Some people have difficulty grasping the complexities of classified research. They make moral judgments without understanding the broader strategic context. Over the following days, Chun gradually exposed Ericka to more sensitive materials, always framing them as historical necessities rather than ongoing crimes. Documents about drug experiments on psychiatric patients were presented as early pharmaceutical research. Files detailing torture techniques were described as enhanced interrogation methodology development. Evidence of murder was characterized as unfortunate adverse outcomes in high-risk research protocols. But Chun made a critical mistake in her recruitment effort. She assumed that Ericka's quiet, analytical personality indicated moral flexibility. She thought that someone who spent their days organizing information wouldn't be troubled by what that information revealed about human suffering. She was wrong. The turning point came during Ericka's second week under Chun's supervision. They were reviewing files from something called Project Neural Pathway, which Chun described as research into cognitive enhancement techniques for military personnel. But as Ericka read the actual documents, she realized she was looking at evidence of systematic brain surgery performed on unwilling subjects. The files contained detailed surgical notes describing procedures that removed or altered parts of subjects. brains to test theories about memory, personality, and behavioral control. Before and after psychological evaluations showed the complete destruction of human beings who had been transformed from functional individuals into vacant shells through deliberate brain damage. One case file particularly haunted her: a 34-year-old homeless veteran named Robert Martinez, who had been picked up by facility personnel in 1987 and subjected to experimental brain surgery designed to eliminate his ability to form new memories. The post-surgical notes described him as functionally lobotomized, but retaining basic motor functions, suitable for long-term observational study. According to the file, Martinez had been kept in facility custody for over 30 years, essentially a living laboratory animal being used to study the long-term effects of deliberate brain damage. And he wasn't alone. The documents reference dozens of similar cases spanning multiple decades. "Dr. Chun," Ericka said carefully as she photographed the Martinez file, "these surgical procedures seem quite extensive. Were these performed on military volunteers?" Chun glanced at the documents and shrugged. The subject recruitment process evolved over time. Early research focused on individuals who were unlikely to be missed by society: homeless populations, psychiatric patients, criminals. It was more efficient than trying to recruit active military personnel for high-risk procedures. The casual way Chun described the systematic targeting of vulnerable people for torture and mutilation made Ericka's stomach turn, but she forced herself to remain calm and professional. "That makes sense from a research efficiency standpoint," she managed. "I'm glad you see it that way," Chun replied. "Some people get emotional about historical research methods without understanding the scientific necessity. It's refreshing to work with someone who can maintain objective perspective." That evening, Ericka sat in her apartment staring at the photograph she'd secretly taken of the Martinez file and dozens of others like it. She wasn't just looking at evidence of past crimes anymore. According to the documents, many of the experimental subjects from the 1980s and 1990s were still being held at the facility, kept alive for ongoing study of the long-term effects of the procedures they'd endured. This wasn't historical research. It was active, ongoing torture of people who had been kidnapped decades ago and were still being held captive in the depths of Blackwater Ridge. The realization that she was working directly above a secret prison filled with victims of government experimentation changed everything for Ericka. She couldn't just document evidence and hope someone else would take action. People were suffering right now, at this moment, in cells beneath her feet. But her first attempt to gather more specific information about current victims nearly got her killed. Using her legitimate access to historical files, Ericka began looking for more recent documents that might indicate where current subjects were being held and how many people were involved. She was careful to stay within her assigned parameters, but she paid special attention to any references to ongoing longitudinal studies or subject maintenance protocols. What she found was a logistic system for managing human prisoners that was chillingly efficient. Current estimates suggested the facility was holding approximately 40 long-term subjects in what the documents euphemistically called secure residential research units on Sublevel 5, a level she'd never known existed. But as Ericka was photographing these documents, she made a mistake that nearly cost her life. Focused on capturing clear images of a prisoner manifest, she didn't notice Dr. Chun returning from lunch early. Chun walked into the archive area just as Ericka was using her personal phone to photograph classified documents. For a moment, both women froze. Then Chun's expression shifted from surprise to something cold and calculating. "Ericka," Chun said quietly, "what are you doing?" "Just taking notes," Ericka replied, trying to keep her voice steady as she slipped her phone back into her pocket. "I wanted to remember the file reference numbers for my digital catalog. With your personal phone? I was just capturing the reference codes. It's faster than writing them down." Chun studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. You know that personal devices aren't allowed in classified areas. All documentation must be done through official channels. Of course, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking clearly. It won't happen again. But Chun was already reaching for her radio. Security, this is Dr. Chun in Archive Section 3 Alpha. I need an immediate supervisor consultation regarding a protocol violation. As Chun called for security backup, Ericka realized her cover was blown. Within minutes, the facility would be swarming with people who knew she had photographed classified evidence of ongoing crimes. Her choice was simple: run now or die in. A facility accident that would be explained as a tragic workplace mishap. She ran, pushing past Chun. Ericka sprinted toward the exit, her mind racing through potential escape routes. Behind her, she could hear Chun shouting into her radio. Code Blue, archive security breach. Initiate lockdown protocols. As alarms began blaring throughout the facility, Ericka knew her life as a quiet data analyst was over. Now, she was a fugitive carrying evidence of the most dangerous conspiracy in American history. And the people who had spent 60 years covering up their crimes were about to hunt her down. Ericka's sprint through the facility corridors felt surreal. Like something from a nightmare where the familiar became suddenly alien and threatening. The sterile hallway she'd walked through peacefully for weeks now seemed like a maze designed to trap her. Behind her, the sound of heavy boots on concrete indicated that security personnel were converging on her location from multiple directions. Her knowledge of the facility's layout became her temporary salvation. During her weeks of routine work, she'd unconsciously mapped the building's structure, noting emergency exits and service corridors that most employees never used. Now that mental map was the only thing standing between her and capture, she burst through a service door into a maintenance corridor, just as the main hallway filled with security guards. Through the narrow window in the door, she could see Director Webb himself directing the search, his face grim with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he knew exactly how dangerous she had become. The maintenance corridor led to a loading dock on the facility's ground level. Ericka's car was in the employee parking lot, but reaching it would mean crossing open ground under the watch of security cameras and armed guards. Instead, she spotted something better. A delivery truck parked at the loading dock, its engine running while the driver unloaded supplies out without hesitation. Ericka climbed into the truck's cab and drove away from Blackwater Ridge for what she knew would be the last time. In her rearview mirror, she watched the facility's security lights illuminate the entire complex as teams of searchers poured out of the building. They had discovered her escape within minutes, but those minutes had been enough. As she drove the stolen truck down the mountain road, Ericka's phone began buzzing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Webb's people were already trying to track her location, probably using cell tower triangulation to narrow down her position. She pulled over at a gas station, bought a prepaid phone with cash, and threw her original phone in a dumpster. It was a small delay, but every minute of freedom was precious now. The safe thing would have been to disappear completely. Change her name, move to another state, and hope Webb's people never found her. But Ericka couldn't stop thinking about Robert Martinez and the dozens of other victims still trapped in sublevel 5. She was the only person outside the conspiracy who knew they existed. The only one who could prove they were being held against their will. Her first attempt to expose the truth nearly got her killed within hours of escaping the facility. Ericka drove to Denver and went straight to the FBI field office, carrying a USB drive with copies of some of the most damning documents she'd photographed. She was naive enough to believe that federal agents would be horrified by evidence of ongoing human experimentation and would immediately launch a rescue operation. Special Agent Jennifer Park listened politely as Ericka explained what she'd discovered. At Blackwater Ridge, Park was professional, thorough, and seemed genuinely concerned about the allegations. She took detailed notes, asked intelligent questions, and assured Ericka that the Bureau would investigate immediately. "This is exactly the kind of serious civil rights violation that we prioritize," Park said as she accepted Ericka's USB drive. "Given the sensitive nature of these allegations, we'll need to coordinate with other agencies to ensure a proper investigation. Can you stay in Denver for a few days while we review this material?" Ericka agreed and checked into a modest hotel under her real name, still not understanding that she was dealing with a conspiracy that had spent decades infiltrating law enforcement agencies. She thought she was finally safe, that professionals were now handling the situation. She was wrong. At 3 a.m., Ericka woke to the sound of her hotel room door being opened with an electronic keycard. In the dim light from the hallway, she could see the silhouettes of 3 men entering her room. One of them was Paul Kruger, the DA assistant director she'd met at the facility just days earlier. "Ms. Davis," Kruger said quietly as his associates moved to block the window and bathroom, "we need to talk." Ericka's blood turned to ice as she realized that Agent Park had been compromised, either corrupted or simply following protocols that required reporting certain types of allegations to other agencies. Her evidence had been handed directly to the people she was trying to expose. "I don't have anything to say to you," Ericka said, pulling the hotel blanket up to her chin as if it could provide protection. "I think you do," Kruger replied, pulling a chair close to her bed and sitting down. "You've caused quite a stir with your unauthorized access to classified materials. Dr. Harrison is very disappointed. He thought you had the potential to become a valuable team member." "Team member?" "The Blackwater Ridge research programs serve essential national security functions," Kruger explained, his voice taking on the same rationalized tone she'd heard from Dr. Chun. "We're developing capabilities that protect American lives and maintain our strategic advantages over hostile nations. What you saw in those files represents decades of sacrifice in service of the greater good." Ericka stared at him in disbelief. "You're talking about torturing innocent people, kidnapping homeless veterans, and performing experimental brain surgery on them. How is that serving the greater good?" Kruger's expression hardened. "You don't understand the strategic context. Every capability we develop prevents American soldiers from facing those same techniques in enemy hands. Every procedure we perfect protects civilians from psychological warfare attacks. The few hundred subjects who have participated in our research have potentially saved millions of lives." "Participated?" Ericka's voice rose despite her fear. "They were kidnapped. They were tortured. Robert Martinez has been held prisoner for over 30 years because you destroyed his brain. Robert Martinez was a homeless drug addict who was contributing nothing to society," Kruger snapped, his mask of reasonableness slipping. "We gave his life meaning by advancing medical science that will benefit humanity for generations." The casual dehumanization in his voice made Ericka realize she was arguing with someone who genuinely believed that certain people's lives were expendable for his vision of the greater good. There was no moral argument that could reach him. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Simple. You're going to return to work at Blackwater Ridge. You'll continue your archive digitization project under closer supervision. And you'll sign additional confidentiality agreements, acknowledging that disclosure of classified information would constitute treason punishable by death. And if I refuse?" Kruger smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Ms. Davis, you're an unstable individual who recently lost her job due to mental health issues. You've been making wild allegations about government facilities as part of a psychotic break from reality. Sadly, people in that condition sometimes harm themselves or others. It would be tragic if you became a danger to public safety." The threat was clear. Sign up as a willing collaborator, or die in a way that would discredit everything she'd discovered. But Kruger had made a critical error. He'd assumed that threatening Ericka would make her compliant, that fear would override her conscience. He didn't understand that learning about the decades of victims had fundamentally changed her. She was no longer just trying to save herself. She was fighting for people who had no other advocate. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Of course, but don't take too long." Kruger stood and headed toward the door. "Oh, and Ms. Davis, don't bother trying to run. We have resources you can't imagine. There's nowhere you can go that we won't find you." After they left, Ericka sat in the dark hotel room, shaking with adrenaline and rage. Kruger was right about one thing. She couldn't run forever from an organization with unlimited government resources and decades of experience hunting down threats. But he was wrong about her options. She couldn't save herself, but she might be able to save the victims still trapped at Blackwater Ridge. Ericka spent the rest of the night planning her next move. If the FBI was compromised, she needed to find someone outside the government who could help. But first, she needed more evidence, material, so comprehensive and undeniable that it couldn't be dismissed or covered up. Her plan was desperately dangerous and probably suicidal. But it was the only chance she could see for getting justice for Robert Martinez and the other victims. She was going back to Blackwater Ridge the next morning. Ericka bought supplies from several different stores, paying cash for everything. Dark clothing, bolt cutters, a high-resolution camera, and enough energy bars and water to last several days. She also visited a print shop and created multiple copies of the evidence she'd already gathered, addressing packages to journalists, politicians, and human rights organizations across the country. Her plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. She would break into Blackwater Ridge at night, gather proof that victims were still being held in Sub-Level 5, and document their conditions with photographs that would make denial impossible. Then she would simultaneously release everything to dozens of media outlets and advocacy groups, creating a media firestorm too large to contain. But first, she needed to ensure that even if she died in the attempt, the evidence would still reach the public. Ericka drove to a small town 50 miles from Denver and found an internet cafe run by an elderly man who seemed to have no interest in monitoring his customers' activities. Using the prepaid phone and a public computer, she created anonymous email accounts and uploaded her evidence to multiple cloud storage services. Then she wrote what she hoped wouldn't be her final message. "My name is Ericka Davis. I am a civilian contractor who discovered evidence of illegal human experimentation at a Defense Department facility called Blackwater Ridge in Colorado. For over 60 years, this facility has kidnapped innocent civilians and subjected them to torture, mind control experiments, and surgical procedures designed to destroy their personalities and memories. These are not historical crimes. They are ongoing. As I write this, dozens of victims are being held prisoner in underground cells, some for over 30 years. They are homeless veterans, psychiatric patients, and other vulnerable people who were specifically targeted because they wouldn't be missed. The people responsible for these crimes include Director Marcus Webb of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Dr. William Harrison, Facility Director, Colonel Janet Morrison, Dr. Sarah Chun, and Paul Kruger. They have spent decades covering up their activities by corrupting law enforcement officials and eliminating anyone who threatens to expose them. Asterisk. If you are reading this, I am probably dead. But the evidence I've gathered proves that the United States government has been systematically torturing its own citizens for 6 decades. The victims in Sub-Level 5 of Blackwater Ridge are still alive and waiting for rescue. Please don't let their suffering be meaningless. Please don't let their voices be silenced. She scheduled the message to be sent automatically to 200 recipients. If she didn't log in to cancel it within 72 hours. It was her insurance policy, her guarantee that even if Webb's people killed her, the truth would eventually come out. Then Ericka drove back toward the mountain facility where her nightmare had begun, knowing she was probably driving to her death, but unable to abandon the people, whose only hope for freedom lay in her willingness to risk everything. As the sun set behind the Colorado mountains, Ericka parked her stolen truck in a Forest Service area 5 miles from Blackwater Ridge and began the hike that would either expose one of history's most horrific conspiracies, or end with her body disappearing forever into the depths of a secret government facility. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. The approach to Blackwater Ridge at night was like descending into hell itself. The facility's exterior lighting created an ominous glow against the mountainside, while infrared security cameras swept the perimeter in systematic patterns that Ericka had spent hours studying from her hidden observation point in the tree line. She had waited until 2 a.m., when the skeleton night crew would be at their most complacent and the facility's security protocols would be focused on preventing people from leaving rather than entering. Her weeks of working inside had taught her that most of the underground levels were minimally staffed at night, with only essential personnel monitoring the ongoing experiments. Using bolt cutters, Ericka created a gap in the perimeter fence at a point where the natural terrain created a blind spot between camera coverage zones. The entry point led to a maintenance access tunnel she discovered in the facility blueprints, a service corridor designed for utility repairs that connected directly to sub-level 3. The tunnel was cramped, dark, and filled with pipes that dripped condensation with an irregular rhythm that made every sound seem amplified. Ericka crawled through the narrow space for what felt like hours, following the building schematic she'd memorized, and praying that the tunnel hadn't been sealed or monitored, since the blueprints were created. When she finally reached the access panel leading into sub-level 3, Ericka paused to listen for any signs of activity in the corridor beyond. The facility was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of ventilation systems and the occasional electronic beep from monitoring equipment. Using a small pry bar, she carefully opened the access panel and emerged into the familiar archive area, where her nightmare had begun. But her destination wasn't the archives. Using the service elevator she discovered during her employment, Ericka descended to sub-level 4, then found the concealed stairwell that led to sub-level 5, the level that wasn't supposed to exist, where the human prisoners were being held. What she found there would haunt her for the rest of her life. Sub-level 5 was a network of holding cells disguised as a medical facility. The corridor was lined with heavy steel doors, each marked with a number and a series of codes that indicated the experimental status of the person imprisoned inside. Through small reinforced windows, Ericka could see into cells that contained human beings in various stages of psychological and physical destruction. The first cell held a woman in her 50s who sat motionless on a narrow bed, staring at the wall with vacant eyes. According to the chart beside her door, she was Subject 47 Alpha, a former psychiatric patient who had been subjected to experimental drug treatments that had left her in a permanent catatonic state. She had been held for 19 years. In the next cell was an elderly man who paced endlessly in small circles, muttering to himself in a voice that suggested his vocal cords had been damaged. His chart indicated he was Subject 23 Beta, a homeless veteran who had undergone experimental brain surgery in 1994. The notes described him as displaying persistent agitation following temporal lobe modification. Cell after cell contained human beings who had been reduced to living laboratory specimens. Some showed obvious signs of surgical intervention, shaved heads with surgical scars, missing limbs that had been amputated for regeneration studies, eyes that had been removed for optical nerve research. Others appeared physically intact, but displayed behavioral patterns that indicated severe psychological damage from years of experimental torture. But it was Cell 15 that broke Ericka's heart completely. Through the window, she could see Robert Martinez, the homeless veteran whose file she discovered weeks earlier. He was sitting on his bed, carefully arranging and rearranging a collection of small objects, pieces of torn fabric, bits of food, broken crayons, with the obsessive precision of someone whose mind had been deliberately damaged. According to his current medical chart, Martinez could no longer form new memories lasting more than a few minutes. Every day was an endless loop of confusion and terror as he repeatedly discovered his imprisonment without understanding how he'd gotten there or how long he'd been held. The experimental brain surgery had left him trapped in a nightmarish present, where he could never build hope for the future or find comfort in memories of the past. Ericka photographed everything: the cells, the prisoners, the medical charts that documented decades of ongoing torture. Each image was another piece of evidence that would make denial impossible, another voice for people who had been silenced by systematic brutality. But as she worked her way through the cell block, documenting the full scope of the horror, she began to hear footsteps in the corridor above. Heavy boots moving with purpose, heading toward the stairwell that led to sublevel 5. They had found her. Ericka's heart hammered as she realized her infiltration had been detected. Motion sensors, heat detectors, or simply bad luck had alerted security to her presence. The footsteps were getting closer, and she could hear radio chatter, indicating that multiple teams were converging on her location. She had maybe minutes before they cornered her, in the underground prison. But as she looked at the cells full of victims who had been waiting decades for rescue, Ericka made a decision that she knew would probably cost her life. She wasn't leaving without trying to free them. Using her bolt cutters, Ericka began attacking the electronic lock on Robert Martinez's cell. The security system was sophisticated, but it had been designed to keep confused, psychologically damaged prisoners inside, not to stop a determined person from breaking in. After several tense minutes, the lock disengaged with a soft click. Martinez looked up at her with eyes that held no recognition or understanding. The brain damage had left him incapable of processing complex situations or forming plans for escape. But when Ericka gently took his hand and said, "We're leaving now, Robert. You're going home," something in his expression shifted slightly. "Home," he whispered, the word seeming to activate some deep, protected memory that had survived the surgical destruction of his mind. "Yes, you're going home." But as Ericka led Martinez toward the stairwell, the security teams reached sublevel 5, the corridor filled with armed guards led by Paul Kruger, who looked at the scene with a mixture of rage and professional calculation. "Miss Davis," Kruger called out, his voice echoing through the cell block, "you're in a restricted area without authorization. Release the subject and step away from him immediately." "His name is Robert Martinez," Ericka shouted back, keeping herself between the guards and the confused veteran. "He's been your prisoner for 30 years. He's going home." Subject 23 Beta is a dangerous individual with severe psychological instability, Kruger replied, slowly advancing with his team. "He requires constant medical supervision for his own safety and the safety of others. You're putting him and yourself at risk." It was the same clinical language they used to justify everything, framing torture as treatment, imprisonment as protection, victims as dangerous subjects who needed to be controlled for everyone's good. But Ericka was done accepting their rationalizations. "Look around you," she yelled, gesturing to the rows of cells. "Look at what you've done to these people. They're not subjects, they're human beings. They have families, they have lives, they have rights. They have purpose." Kruger corrected. "Every procedure, every study, every sacrifice serves the greater mission of protecting American lives. You can't understand the strategic necessity because you don't have the clearance to see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" Ericka's voice cracked with rage and grief. "The bigger picture is that you're monsters who have spent 60 years torturing innocent people and calling it patriotism." Kruger's patience finally snapped. He raised his weapon and aimed it directly at her chest. "Ms. Davis, you will release Subject 23 Beta and surrender yourself for psychological evaluation. This is your final warning." But before he could fire, something unexpected happened. The sound of their confrontation had awakened other prisoners in nearby cells, and they began calling out, not the incoherent babbling of the severely brain-damaged, but actual words, names, pleas for help. "Please." A woman's voice called from cell 18. "My name is Linda Thompson. I was taken from a hospital in Phoenix in 2003. Please help me. I'm David Chun." Came another voice from cell 22. "They took me from a homeless shelter in Seattle. I've been here for 12 years. Help us." Multiple voices began chanting, "Help us, help us." For the first time in decades, the victims of Blackwater Ridge were speaking with one voice, demanding to be seen as human beings rather than experimental subjects. Their cries echoed through the cell block, creating a chorus of testimony that no amount of classification or rationalization could silence. Kruger's face went pale as he realized that Ericka's presence had awakened something dangerous, hope among people who were supposed to have been broken beyond repair. The carefully maintained fiction that these were willing research subjects or dangerous individuals who needed containment was crumbling in real time. "Shut them up," he barked to his team. "Deploy sedative gas. Restore order immediately." But it was too late. Ericka had already transmitted the cell block recordings to her cloud storage accounts, using a small device she'd prepared for exactly this moment. Even if they killed her now, the voices of the victims would reach the outside world. As guards began deploying chemical weapons to silence the prisoners, Ericka made one final desperate gambit. She activated a small explosive device she'd prepared, not enough to hurt anyone, but sufficient to trigger the facility's emergency systems and create enough chaos for her to attempt an escape. The explosion knocked out power to sub-level 5, plunging the cell block into darkness. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows as alarm systems throughout the facility began wailing. In the confusion, Ericka grabbed Robert Martinez and ran toward the stairwell, hoping that the emergency protocols would automatically unlock the cell doors and give the other prisoners a chance at freedom. Behind her, she could hear Kruger screaming orders to his teams. "Find them! Lock down all exits! No one leaves this facility alive." As she climbed the emergency stairs with a confused, brain-damaged veteran who might be the only survivor who could testify about 60 years of government torture, Ericka realized that she had crossed a line that made survival secondary to justice. Even if she died in the next few minutes, she had given the victims their voices back. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The hunt through the darkened facility was about to begin. But now the hunters were no longer sure they could control the narrative. If any of their prey escaped alive, the emergency stairwell echoed with the sound of boots pounding on metal steps as Ericka half-carried, half-dragged Robert Martinez toward the upper levels. The facility's alarm system had plunged most sections into chaos, but she could hear Kruger's voice over the communication system, coordinating search teams with military precision. "All exits are sealed," his amplified voice announced throughout the complex, initiating Lockdown Protocol 7. "No personnel may leave without direct authorization from command." Ericka knew that reaching the surface wouldn't guarantee escape. Kruger's teams would be waiting at every exit. But she also knew something they didn't: the emergency protocols she'd triggered had automatically activated the facility's data backup systems, uploading decades of classified files to secure servers as a protection against loss during crisis situations. Her small explosive device hadn't just created chaos, it had inadvertently initiated a massive data breach that was currently copying everything in the facility's computer systems to off-site storage that she might be able to access if she survived long enough. Where are we going?" Martinez whispered as they climbed. His voice was childlike, confused, the result of brain damage that had left him with the cognitive capacity of someone much younger. "We're getting out of here, Robert," Ericka replied, trying to keep her voice calm and reassuring despite their desperate situation. "We're going to find people who can help you." "Help me what?" "Help you go home. Help you be safe." "Home," he repeated, and again that flicker of something deeper crossed his damaged features. "I remembered a house. A dog. Maria?" "Maria might be waiting for you," Ericka said, though she had no idea if anyone from Martinez's previous life was still alive. "We'll find her." They reached sub-level 3, where emergency lighting cast everything in an ominous red glow. Ericka could hear search teams moving through the facility's main corridors, their tactical communications creating a constant background chatter of military jargon and position reports. She needed to reach the surface and get Martinez to safety, but she also realized this might be her only chance to gather the comprehensive evidence needed to bring down the entire operation. The emergency had triggered automatic backup procedures that temporarily bypassed normal security protocols. Classified computer terminals that would normally require multiple authorizations were now accessible with basic administrative credentials, copying their contents to protected servers as a precaution against data loss. "Robert, I need you to sit here for a few minutes," Ericka said, settling Martinez in a supply closet where he would be hidden from patrols. "I need to collect some important information, and then we'll leave together. You'll come back?" The fear in his voice was heartbreaking, the terror of someone who had been abandoned and tortured for 3 decades. "I promise I'll come back. I won't leave you here." Martinez nodded and began arranging some office supplies he'd found in the closet, his damaged mind finding comfort in the repetitive organizing behavior that seemed to be his only coping mechanism. Ericka made her way to the facility's main data center, where banks of servers hummed quietly despite the chaos elsewhere in the building. The emergency protocols had activated backup systems that were copying terabytes of classified information to secure off-site storage, but they were also temporarily making that information accessible to anyone with administrative privileges. Access codes she'd memorized during her employment, Ericka began downloading files that contained the complete operational history of Blackwater Ridge, financial records showing payments to corrupt officials at hospitals and prisons who had provided unwilling research subjects, personnel files detailing everyone who had participated in the illegal experiments over 6 decades, medical records documenting the specific procedures performed on individual victims. Most importantly, she found the current operational plans, documents that revealed Blackwater Ridge was just one facility in a network of similar installations across the country. The conspiracy wasn't limited to a single location. It was a nationwide program operating under various code names and involving hundreds of researchers, military personnel, and civilian contractors. As she copied file after file to encrypted drives, Ericka discovered evidence that would destroy careers at the highest levels of government. Senators who had authorized funding for the programs, Pentagon officials who had covered up investigations, federal judges who had dismissed lawsuits filed by families of missing persons. The conspiracy reached into every branch of government and included some of the most powerful people in America. But the most shocking discovery was a series of documents labeled Project Renewal, a current program designed to expand the human experimentation to include testing on active military personnel. The files revealed plans to secretly dose soldiers with experimental drugs during routine medical procedures, then monitor the long-term effects without their knowledge or consent. According to the timeline, Project Renewal was scheduled to begin full implementation within 6 months. Thousands of American service members would become unwilling test subjects for the same kinds of psychological and pharmaceutical experiments that had destroyed Robert Martinez and hundreds of others. Ericka was copying these files when she heard footsteps approaching the data center. Through the reinforced glass doors, she could see a security team led by Dr. Sarah Chun moving systematically through the corridor, checking every room and office. "She has to be on this level," Chun was saying into her radio. "The stairwell monitors show she accessed sub-level 3 approximately 12 minutes ago. The subject is probably slowing her down." Ericka quickly finished her downloads and slipped out of the data center through a rear exit, just as Chun's team reached the main entrance. But as she made her way back toward the supply closet where she'd left Martinez, she realized that Chun's reference to the subject revealed something crucial. They weren't just hunting her anymore. They needed Martinez alive. As the only surviving victim with enough cognitive function to potentially testify about his experiences, Martinez represented an existential threat to the entire operation. If he could remember even fragments of his imprisonment and communicate them to investigators, his testimony would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. But his brain damage also made him incredibly vulnerable. The same procedures that had destroyed his capacity for complex thinking had left him dependent on others for protection and guidance. In the wrong hands, he could be easily manipulated or made to disappear permanently. When Ericka reached the supply closet, she found Martinez exactly where she'd left him, still organizing and reorganizing the same collection of office supplies. But his behavior had changed. He was rocking slightly back and forth, a sign of extreme stress that suggested he could sense the danger around him, even if he couldn't understand it. "It's time to go, Robert," she said gently, helping him to his feet. "Are the bad people gone?" he asked. "Not yet, but we're going to get away from them." As they moved through the facility's service corridors, Ericka transmitted her newly gathered evidence to the same cloud storage accounts she'd prepared earlier. Even if they were captured or killed, the complete operational files of the conspiracy would still reach the outside world through her automated distribution system. But she also realized that simply releasing the evidence wouldn't be enough to ensure justice. The conspiracy had spent 60 years perfecting their ability to discredit whistleblowers, control media narratives, and eliminate threats. They had survived previous exposure attempts because they'd always been able to silence witnesses before. They could tell their stories. This time would be different, because this time they had living witnesses who could put human faces on their crimes. As they climbed toward the surface, Ericka began planning beyond mere escape. She needed to get Martinez to safety and find other survivors who could corroborate his testimony. She needed to identify journalists and investigators who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Most importantly, she needed to build a case so comprehensive and public that the conspiracy couldn't suppress it through their usual methods. But first, she had to survive the next few hours. The facility's upper levels were crawling with security teams, and she could hear helicopters circling the mountain facility, their searchlights sweeping the terrain for any sign of escapees. Kruger's voice continued to echo through the communication system, coordinating a manhunt that involved dozens of armed personnel. "Remember," his amplified voice announced, "the primary objective is recovery of the stolen classified materials. The secondary objective is containment of security breaches. Use whatever force is necessary to prevent unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information." The message was clear. They had authorization to kill anyone who threatened to expose their operation. As Ericka and Martinez reached the facility's main level, she realized their escape route through the maintenance tunnel had been discovered and sealed. Security teams were positioned at every known exit, and thermal imaging equipment was scanning for heat signatures throughout the complex. But Ericka had one advantage that Kruger couldn't account for: her weeks of working in the way facility had taught her about systems and passages that weren't documented in the official blueprints. Hidden routes created by decades of modifications and expansions, forgotten during administrative transitions and bureaucratic reshuffling. She led Martinez through a series of maintenance shafts and utility corridors that connected to the facility's original ventilation system, a network of tunnels that had been abandoned when the complex was expanded, but never properly sealed. The abandoned ventilation shafts were cramped, dirty, and filled with decades of accumulated dust that made breathing difficult. but they led directly to the mountainside, connecting to an old air intake that had been disguised as natural rock formation. As they crawled through the narrow tunnels, Martinez began to panic. "I don't like small spaces," he whispered, his voice tight with terror. "They put me in small spaces. They hurt me in small spaces." "This is different, Robert," Ericka assured him. "This small space leads to the outside. This small space leads to freedom." Freedom? The word seemed foreign to him, a concept his damaged mind struggled to process. Yes, no more cells. No more doctors who hurt you. No more being locked up. "No more being locked up," he repeated, as if testing the idea. When they finally emerged from the ventilation tunnel onto the mountainside, the cool night air felt like salvation. They were outside the facility's immediate security perimeter, but they could see search teams with dogs beginning to sweep the surrounding terrain. Ericka looked back at the facility that had hidden 60 years of atrocities, then at the confused, damaged man who represented hope for justice. She had enough evidence to expose the conspiracy, but she also knew that the people responsible would do anything to prevent that evidence from reaching the public. The real battle was just beginning. 3 days after escaping Blackwater Ridge, Ericka sat in a dingy motel room in Albuquerque, New Mexico, watching Robert Martinez carefully arrange and rearrange a collection of cheap toiletries they'd bought at a gas station. His repetitive behavior was oddly comforting in their desperate situation, a sign that despite everything he'd endured, some part of his mind still sought order and meaning. But their brief sanctuary was about to be shattered by an unexpected knock on the door. Ericka froze, her hand moving instinctively toward the small pistol she'd purchased from a pawn shop. Through the peephole, she could see a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and tired eyes, wearing civilian clothes that somehow suggested military bearing. "Miss Davis," the woman called softly. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Amanda Hayes, U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division. I'm here to help, not to arrest you." Ericka's heart pounded. How had they found her? Was this another trap, another agent working for Webb's conspiracy? But something in the woman's voice carried a note of genuine urgency that made her pause. "How do I know you're not working for them?" Ericka called through the door. "Because they killed my brother," Hayes replied, her voice cracking slightly. "Staff Sergeant Michael Hayes disappeared from Fort Carson in 2018. Official records say he went up WOL. But I know better. I've been investigating his disappearance for 5 years, and your evidence just confirmed my worst fears." Ericka slowly opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. Through the narrow gap, she could see that Hayes was alone, and her emotional state seemed genuine. More importantly, she was holding a laptop computer that displayed familiar documents, files from Blackwater Ridge that Ericka had uploaded to her cloud storage accounts. "Your automated email system activated yesterday," Hayes explained. "I received copies of everything you documented. Medical records, financial transactions, personnel files, including evidence that my brother was transferred to something called Special Research Protocol 7 just before he disappeared." Hayes's voice hardened with controlled fury. "According to the files you gathered, Michael was selected for involuntary pharmaceutical testing because his psychological profile indicated he would be unlikely to report adverse reactions to superior officers. They drugged him, studied him, and when the experiments caused permanent neurological damage, they classified him as a security risk and transferred him to long-term containment." "Long-term containment?" "Sub-level 5. He's been a prisoner at Blackwater Ridge for 5 years, listed in their records as Subject 73 Gamma." Ericka felt a chill of recognition. She remembered photographing that designation during her escape, but she hadn't connected it to a specific person. "You're sure it's your brother?" Hayes showed her the laptop screen, which displayed Michael Hayes's military photo alongside a KIA medical file from Blackwater Ridge. The man in the uniform was young, confident, and healthy. The clinical notes describe progressive deterioration following experimental drug treatments that have left him with severe tremors, memory loss, and what the documents coldly termed compliance through induced dependency. They turned my brother into a drug addict to keep him controllable, Hayes said, her professional composure barely containing her rage. Then they used his addiction to justify holding him indefinitely for medical treatment and observation. Ericka removed the chain lock and let Hayes into the motel room. As the Army investigator entered, Robert Martinez looked up from his toiletry arrangement with the curious, childlike expression that had become his default response to new situations. "Hello," he said simply. "Are you a nice person or a bad person?" Hayes stared at Martinez for a moment, clearly recognizing him from the photographs in Ericka's evidence files. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but filled with barely suppressed emotion. "I'm a nice person, Robert. I'm here to help make sure the bad people can't hurt you anymore." "Good," Martinez replied, returning to his organizing. "Ericka is a nice person too. She helped me leave the bad place." Hayes turned to Ericka with an expression of professional determination. "We need to talk. What you've uncovered isn't just evidence of crimes. It's intelligence that could save dozens of current victims and prevent thousands of future ones." Over the next several hours, Hayes revealed that she wasn't the only person who had been investigating the conspiracy surrounding Blackwater Ridge. As a criminal investigator with high-level security clearances, she had identified a network of military and civilian personnel who had been quietly gathering evidence of illegal human experimentation programs for years. "The problem," Hus explained, "is that most of us only had pieces of the puzzle. A suspicious disappearance here, a questionable research grant there, financial irregularities that suggested something larger. But we never had comprehensive evidence of the entire operation. Until now," Ericka said. "Until now. Your evidence doesn't just prove that crimes were committed. It provides the complete organizational structure, financial networks, and operational protocols that we need to bring down everyone involved." Hayes opened her laptop and showed Ericka a secure communication network that connected dozens of investigators, journalists, and advocacy organizations across the country. Military personnel who had lost family members to suspicious disappearances. Civilian researchers who had been forced out of their jobs for asking too many questions. Families who had spent years searching for missing relatives who had vanished from hospitals and shelters. Dr. Elizabeth Carter at Johns Hopkins has been documenting suspicious patient disappearances from psychiatric hospitals for over a decade, Hayes explained, scrolling through encrypted files. She identified a pattern of high-functioning patients being transferred to specialized research facilities and never returning. Senator Patricia Williams has been trying to investigate Defense Department black budget allocations that don't match any known programs. Your financial documents provide the missing link between congressional appropriations and illegal research activities. Investigative journalist Thomas Rodriguez has been tracking correlations between veteran suicides and prior involvement in classified medical programs. Your personnel files give him the evidence he needs to prove systematic cover-ups. As Hayes continued describing their network of allies, Ericka began to understand that her evidence hadn't just exposed individual crimes. It had provided the final pieces needed to document a conspiracy that dozens of people had been working to uncover for years. But Hayes also revealed the enormous risks they were all facing. Webb's people have been systematically eliminating threats for decades, she said, showing Ericka a list of suspicious deaths and disappearances. Dr. James Morrison, a psychiatrist who tried to report missing patients in 2015, car accident on a clear day, no witnesses. Captain Susan Rivera, a military intelligence officer who questioned irregular prisoner transfers in 2019, apparent suicide. No note, out of character according to family and colleagues. Journalist Michael Thompson was investigating government medical experiments when his house burned down in 2020, officially ruled electrical fire, but the timing was remarkably convenient. The list goes on and on. So what makes you think we can succeed where others failed? Ericka asked. Because we have something they've never faced before, Hayes replied, gesturing toward Robert Martinez. We have living witnesses who can testify about their experiences. We have comprehensive documentation that proves ongoing crimes, not just historical ones. And most importantly, we have a coordinated strategy involving multiple organizations that will make their usual suppression tactics impossible. Hayes outlined their plan, which was ambitious and dangerous but offered their best chance for justice. Rather than releasing the evidence all at once through traditional media channels that could be controlled or discredited, they would coordinate simultaneous actions on multiple fronts. Senator Williams would call for emergency congressional hearings based on the financial evidence. Dr. Carter would file complaints with medical ethics boards and law enforcement agencies in every state where patients had disappeared. Rodriguez would publish investigative articles in multiple international publications simultaneously, making suppression impossible. Meanwhile, Hayes and her military contacts would work through official channels to document violations of military justice codes and initiate formal investigations through the Inspector General's office. The key, Hayes explained, is that they can't silence all of us at the same time. Their power comes from operating in shadows and controlling information flow. If we force them into the light from multiple directions simultaneously, their usual tactics become ineffective. But the plan required Ericka and Martinez to take enormous personal risks. They would need to testify publicly about their experiences, making themselves permanent targets for elimination. Martinez, with his limited cognitive abilities, would be particularly vulnerable to intimidation or manipulation. I understand the dangers, Ericka said, but how do we know we can trust everyone in your network? Webb's people have infiltrated law enforcement and government agencies before. Hayes nodded grimly. We can't be certain about everyone. But we've been careful to verify each person's credibility through multiple sources. And the beauty of our approach is that even if some of our allies are compromised, the simultaneous multi-front strategy makes complete suppression impossible. As they discussed the details of their coordinated exposure plan, Martinez suddenly spoke up from his corner of the room. My sister, he said quietly. I had a sister, Maria. She used to make tamales for Christmas. Hayes and Ericka exchanged glances. This was the first time Martinez had mentioned a specific family member with any detail. We'll find Maria, Robert, Hayes said gently. When this is over, we'll help you find your family. She was worried about me, Martinez continued, his damaged mind struggling to access deeper memories. She said I was drinking too much. She said I needed help. You were trying to get help when they took you, weren't you? Ericka asked. Martinez nodded slowly. I went to the hospital. The nice doctor said they could help me stop drinking, but then there were the bad doctors, and the small rooms, and the machines that hurt my head. His testimony, fragmented as it was, would be devastating if presented in the right forum. A homeless veteran seeking help for addiction, only to be kidnapped and tortured by government. Researchers who had spent decades preying on society's most vulnerable members. As Hayes prepared to leave and coordinate with their allies, she gave Ericka new secure communication equipment and detailed instructions for the next phase of their operation. In 72 hours, we go public simultaneously across all fronts, Hayes said. Congressional testimony, media exposure, criminal complaints, and military investigations, all happening at the same time in different jurisdictions. And if it doesn't work, Ericka asked. Then we'll have died trying to do the right thing, Hayes replied. But I don't think it will come to that. Webb's people have operated successfully for 60 years because they've never faced coordinated resistance from people who couldn't be silenced or bought. That changes now. As Hayes left the motel room, Ericka realized that her lonely fight for justice had become something much larger, a coordinated effort involving dozens of people who had been waiting years for the evidence needed to bring down a conspiracy that had destroyed countless lives. The final battle was about to begin, and for the first time since discovering the unlocked file cabinet at Blackwater Ridge, Ericka felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. At exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time on March 15, 2024. The conspiracy that had operated in darkness for 60 years was dragged into the light by a coordinated assault that Director Marcus Webb's organization had never imagined possible. Senator Patricia Williams opened emergency congressional hearings with a statement that sent shockwaves through Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, I am presenting evidence of the most systematic violation of human rights in American history, a decades-long program of illegal human experimentation conducted by Defense Department personnel on innocent civilians. Simultaneously, in newsrooms across the country and around the world, journalist Thomas Rodriguez's investigation was being published under headlines that would dominate news cycles for months. The Hidden Prison: How the U.S. Military Tortured Civilians for 60 Years, and Project Mindbridge: Inside America's Secret Human Experimentation Program. In Baltimore, Dr. Elizabeth Carter was filing criminal complaints with federal prosecutors in 12 states, providing evidence that linked patient disappearances to a coordinated network of government-funded kidnapping operations. And in a secure military courtroom at Fort Leavenworth, Lieutenant Colonel Amanda Hayes was presenting evidence to a panel of military judges that would result in the largest court-martial proceedings in modern U.S. history. But the most powerful moment of that historic day occurred in the basement hearing room of the Hart Senate Office Building, where Ericka Davis sat beside Robert Martinez as he prepared to testify before Congress about his 30 years of imprisonment and torture. "State your name for the record," Senator Williams said gently. "My name is Robert Martinez," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but audible through the microphone. I was a soldier. I served in Desert Storm." "Mr. Martinez, can you tell us what happened to you in 1994? Martinez's damaged mind struggled with the chronology, but he managed to provide testimony that was devastating in its simple honesty. "I was drinking too much. My sister Maria, she was worried. She said I should get help, so I went to the VA hospital in Denver." "What happened at the hospital?" "There was a nice doctor. He said they had a special program for veterans like me. He said they could fix the drinking problem and the nightmares." Martinez paused, his face contorting with the effort of accessing traumatic memories. "But then there were other doctors. Bad doctors. They put me in a small room and they hurt my head." "Can you describe what they did to your head, Mr. Martinez?" "They cut it open. They took things out. They said it was to help me, but it hurt so much. And afterwards, I couldn't remember things anymore. I couldn't remember my sister's birthday, or my dog's name, or how to read very well." The hearing room was completely silent, except for Martinez's halting testimony. Even the most cynical politicians and journalists present were visibly affected by his account of systematic dehumanization disguised as medical treatment. "Mr. Martinez, how long were you held at the facility?" "A long time, many years. I tried to count, but I couldn't remember numbers very good anymore. They gave me a number instead of my name. They called me 23 Beta. And during this time, did anyone try to help you or find you?" "No, the doctors said my family didn't want me anymore. They said I was sick and dangerous and nobody cared about me." Martinez looked directly at the panel of senators. "But Ericka cared about me. She said I had a name and I was going home." When Martinez finished his testimony, Senator Williams turned to Ericka. "Ms. Davis, you risked your life to expose these crimes and rescue Mr. Martinez. What motivated you to take such extraordinary risks?" Ericka thought about everything that had led to this moment, The unlocked file cabinet, the photographs of victims, her confrontation with Webb and his associates, the desperate escape through mountain tunnels. Senator Williams, when I found those files, I realized that Robert Martinez and hundreds of others had been disappeared, not because they were criminals or terrorists, but because they were vulnerable. They were homeless, mentally ill, addicted, or just poor. People our society had already failed once. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. The people responsible for these crimes counted on that vulnerability. They counted on the fact that no one would miss these victims, no one would look for them, no one would fight for them. They were wrong. What should happen now, Ms. Davis? Justice, Senator. Real accountability for everyone involved. Not just the people who carried out the procedures, but the officials who authorized them, funded them, and covered them up for 60 years. And immediate medical care and compensation for every survivor, still being held in facilities like Blackwater Ridge. As Ericka testified, similar scenes were playing out across the country. In courtrooms, prosecutors' offices, and military tribunals, the comprehensive evidence she had gathered was being used to build cases against hundreds of conspirators. Director Marcus Webb was arrested at his Virginia home at 6:42 a.m., just as the morning news shows were beginning to broadcast the first reports about the Blackwater Ridge expose. His attempt to destroy evidence by burning documents in his backyard was captured on video by FBI surveillance teams and later became a symbol of the conspiracy's desperate attempt to avoid accountability. Dr. William Harrison was taken into custody at Blackwater Ridge itself, where federal marshals found him attempting to evacuate the remaining prisoners to undisclosed locations. The facility was sealed and converted into a rescue operation as medical teams worked to evaluate and treat 43 victims who had been held for periods ranging from 6 months to over 3 decades. Paul Kruger died attempting to flee the country. His private jet crashed under suspicious circumstances while crossing the Mexican border, officially ruled pilot error, though many investigators suspected he had been eliminated by associates who feared he might cooperate with prosecutors. In exchange for leniency, Dr. Sarah Chun became the prosecution's star witness, providing detailed testimony about the internal operations of the conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her clinical records and personal knowledge proved essential for understanding the full scope of the illegal activities and identifying victims who had been held at multiple facilities. The trials that followed would last for over 2 years, result in convictions for 127 defendants, including Pentagon officials, civilian contractors, medical personnel, and security staff. Prison sentences ranged from 5 years for lower-level participants to life imprisonment for senior leaders like Webb and Harrison, but the most important outcome was the systematic identification and treatment of victims who had been held at facilities across the country. Using Ericka's evidence as a roadmap, investigators located and liberated survivors from 12 different locations, reuniting families that had been separated for decades and providing medical care for people who had been deliberately brain damaged by government researchers. Robert Martinez was among the success stories, though his recovery was limited by the extensive neurological damage he had suffered. Reunited with his sister Maria, who had spent 30 years searching for him and filing missing person reports that had been systematically ignored, he received specialized medical treatment that improved his cognitive function and reduced his dependency on the repetitive behaviors that had become his coping mechanisms. He would never fully recover from what had been done to him, but with Maria's care and support, he was able to live in a supervised group home where he helped tend a garden and occasionally spoke to investigators and journalists about his experiences. His simple, honest testimony became one of the most powerful tools for ensuring that the crimes of Blackwater Ridge would never be forgotten or repeated. For Ericka, the exposure of the conspiracy marked the beginning of a new career as an investigative researcher specializing in government accountability and human rights violations. She testified before Congress 17 times in the 2 years following the Blackwater Ridge expose, helping to draft legislation that strengthened oversight of classified medical research and created new protections for whistleblowers reporting government misconduct. But the victory came at enormous personal cost. 3 attempts were made on her life by associates of the original conspiracy who had escaped prosecution. She lived under federal protection for over a year and was forced to relocate multiple times when her security was compromised. Lieutenant Colonel Amanda Hayes found her brother Michael among the victims rescued from Blackwater Ridge, though 5 years of experimental drug treatments had left him permanently disabled by tremors and memory loss. Their reunion was bittersweet. He recognized her but struggled to understand what had happened to him, or why he had been kept prisoner for so long. Hayes retired from active duty to become Michael's caregiver and an advocate for other victims of the conspiracy. She established a non-profit organization that provided legal and medical support for survivors and their families, funded partially by the multi-billion-dollar settlements that the government eventually paid to compensate victims. Blackwater Ridge expose fundamentally changed how classified research programs were conducted and oversight. New laws required independent monitoring of all government-funded medical research, mandatory reporting of adverse events in experimental programs, and criminal penalties for officials who authorized or participated in research involving unwilling subjects. More importantly, it demonstrated that even the most powerful and well-established conspiracies could be brought down by ordinary people who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. 5 years after walking into that basement archive as a quiet data analyst from Indiana, Ericka Davis stood before the memorial that had been erected at the former Blackwater Ridge facility. The names of 247 confirmed victims were carved into black granite, including those who had died during the illegal experiments and those who had survived to see justice. Robert Martinez was with her, along with Maria and several other survivors who had gathered for the annual remembrance ceremony. Despite his cognitive limitations, he had insisted on reading a brief statement that he had carefully memorized. "My name is Robert Martinez. I am a person, not a number. What happened to me was wrong, but it's over now. Thank you to everyone who remembered that we were human beings worth saving." As Ericka watched him struggle through his prepared words, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A single unlocked file cabinet had led to the exposure of 60 years of systematic torture, the rescue of dozens of victims, and the prosecution of a conspiracy that had seemed untouchable. But the most important outcome wasn't the convictions, or the legislative changes, or even the compensation for survivors. It was the simple restoration of dignity to people who had been deliberately dehumanized by their own government. In the end, that dignity, the recognition that every person had value regardless of their circumstances or vulnerabilities, was what had made their victory possible. And it would be what ensured that the crimes of Blackwater Ridge would never happen again. Because sometimes, when ordinary people find the courage to speak truth to power, they discover they're not as ordinary as they thought. And sometimes, that's enough to change the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.